My name's Mara Ellison. I'm 34 now, and last year I sat through my mother's will reading while my own family treated me like I didn't belong in the room. Not just ignored, dismissed, like I was the maid someone forgot to send home after the funeral. It was held in one of those soulless boutique law firms in Charleston. Glass walls, stone counters, everything beige and overpriced. I wore a black blazer from Goodwill, ironed 3 times to smooth the creases. My cousin Rory showed up in head-to-toe Loro Piana like he was prepping for a yacht launch. No one hugged me. No one even said, "How are you holding up?" My mom, Anne Ellison, was the quiet backbone of this family. Never flashy, never wealthy, but respected. A tenured art history professor who raised me alone after my dad bailed when I was 7. She spent her life teaching kids about forgotten women artists and preserving history no one else cared to remember. Her siblings, my aunts and uncles, always smiled politely at her at holidays, but you could feel it. That undercurrent of judgment. Like she was the underachiever, the poor one, the one who didn't monetize her brain. And me? They barely saw me at all. So I shouldn't have been surprised when, during the will reading, my name didn't come up. Not in the stocks, not in the jewelry, not in the Ellison collection of European prints. Hell, even the damn beach house went to Uncle Davis, who hasn't stepped in sand without a golf club in 20 years. I sat there, spine straight, heart pounding, pretending not to feel it as the lawyer droned on. Everyone was nodding, fake crying, already calculating resale values. Then, just as people started collecting their purses and murmuring about lunch plans, the lawyer cleared his throat and said, "There's one final item. A personal envelope marked private for Mara only." The room went still. He handed it to me across the table. Pale yellow stationery, my name in her handwriting. And Rory, bless his entitled little heart, actually said out loud, "Oh, is that like a thank you note?" I didn't answer. I just opened it. My hands were shaking and my face felt hot, but my mom's voice came through so clearly I swear I could hear her say it. "They inherited objects. You inherited my vision. Check the key I left in the sunflower pot." That's it. No explanations, just those 3 lines. Everyone stared at me, waiting like I was going to read the letter out loud. Like maybe I was holding something they'd missed, something they could still stake a claim on. I folded the paper quietly, slid it into my purse, and stood up. "Thanks for the hospitality," I said, and walked out. Back in her old garden that evening, I found the sunflower pot tucked behind the weathered shed. It hadn't bloomed in years, but she kept replanting every season like it would eventually come back. I dug through the soil with my bare hands. Beneath the roots, a velvet pouch wrapped in plastic, tied with red thread. Inside was a tiny key, and a laminated tag from a storage unit I'd never seen before. It read, "Ellison Archive. Unit 427, personal use only." What I found in that unit changed everything I thought I knew about my mom, and about what she'd been building all along, right under their noses. And what I did next? Let's just say, they should have never left me out of that will. Not when I was holding the one piece they didn't even know existed. I didn't sleep that night. I kept turning Mom's letter over in my hands like it was a map written in code. You inherited my vision. What did that even mean? The next morning, I drove out to the address on the storage tag, a rundown U-Haul storage lot on the edge of town, sandwiched between a shuttered gas station and an empty laundromat. The clerk didn't even blink when I handed over the key. She led me to Unit 427, slid the door open with a groan, and walked away. Inside. No old furniture. No family junk. No boxes of dusty books. Just a climate-controlled space, neatly lit and packed wall-to-wall with artwork. Some in crates, some already framed. I recognized a few names from the lectures Mom used to give. Lois Malou Jones, Carmen Herrera, Augusta Savage. Women artists who were constantly overlooked in major museum collections. Each piece was labeled, cataloged, insured. She hadn't just collected them, she'd protected them. On a folding table sat a battered laptop, an old-school label maker, and a thick binder marked Project Restore in her handwriting. I flipped it open. It was a full proposal. Financials, architectural renderings, grant letters, for converting a century-old church in downtown Charleston into a free public arts center for underfunded schools. I had no words. All those years they joked about how poor Anne wasted her 10-year salary on cause art. She'd been building a legacy with surgical precision. She'd saved, applied for grants, partnered with local educators, even got a conditional historical landmark permit, all waiting on final signatures. And no one knew. Not even me. I sat on the concrete floor for a full hour just letting it wash over me. But here's where it gets real ugly. That night, I dug through the city's planning board records to check on the status of the church property. I figured maybe she still owned it. Nope. The land had just changed hands. The buyer? A holding company connected to Ellison Property Group. That's my Uncle Davis's company, my mother's brother. The same man who'd smiled at me across the will reading like I was a ghost with bad posture. The same man who'd given a speech at her funeral about preserving Anne's integrity and spirit. Turns out he had submitted a proposal to turn the church into a luxury event venue, a heritage wedding space with spa suites and rooftop bar access. I found the damn promotional video on Vimeo. It had soft piano music and fake watercolor sketches of Instagrammable couples kissing under stained glass. My mother's stained glass. The church wasn't even fully transferred when he filed the redevelopment request, which means he'd been planning it while she was dying. She passed away from lymphoma in March. The property changed hands in April, and at the will reading in May, he handed me a packet of tissues and said, "She'd be so proud of you for showing up." I thought I'd been left out of the will, but that wasn't the betrayal. The real betrayal was realizing they knew. All of them. That afternoon, I drove to the church. It was still standing. Still beautiful. Ivy creeping up the stone walls, rust around the hinges, the big oak doors locked with a padlock that looked brand new. I stood there with my hands in my coat pockets, staring at the little sign that read, Ellison Events, Future Site, Opening Summer 2025. And it hit me. They were planning to plaster our family name across a building my mom tried to save, just so they could charge $25,000 for curated weddings while sipping rosé on what was supposed to be a classroom. I don't remember crying. I remember going very, very still. Because right then, I knew. They thought they'd erased her, but she'd left the blueprint with me. And if Uncle Davis thought this was going to be an easy cash grab, he had no idea what was coming next. Because that storage unit didn't just hold paintings and plans. It also held the original deed, in my mom's name. And her signature was never on the transfer papers. The next few days were a blur of legal pads, phone calls, and emotions I didn't know how to name. I kept going back and forth between heartbreak and fury. One second I'd be crying over Mom's handwriting in the margins of the binder, and the next I'd be slamming my laptop shut because I'd found another email linking Uncle Davis's company to contractors already bidding on gutting the church. They hadn't even waited for her ashes to settle. She'd spent the last 5 years of her life piecing this together in silence. Hiding it not because she didn't trust me, but because she knew what they'd do if they found out. And now they were literally planning a champagne brunch bar where she'd once written, Reading Nook, Sunlight Corner. I hired a lawyer, not a high-powered one. Just someone honest, someone willing to dig. Turned out the paperwork transferring the church property had a forged signature. The notary listed was a woman who moved to Arizona 3 years ago. Her stamp had expired. It wasn't just shady, it was criminal. So I did what Mom would have done. I didn't go to the police. I went to the source. Uncle Davis was hosting a family celebration dinner at his Charleston brownstone that weekend, just days after closing the deal on the church. I RSP'd. Yes. I showed up in the same thrift store blazer I'd worn to the will reading. No makeup, just a worn manila envelope under my arm. When I walked in, everything stopped for a second. Not in a dramatic way. Just that slight hush that always happens when someone shows up that nobody expected to see. Aunt Gloria offered me a glass of wine with a smile so tight I thought it might split her face. "Didn't think we'd see you," she said. "I wouldn't miss it," I replied. The dining room table was a showroom. White linen, gold chargers, custom name cards. Mine said Mara, corner seat. Of course it did. Rory was already 2 glasses in and halfway through a story about a girl who'd ghosted him. "They always come back when they realize who I am," he said, laughing. "Like, girl, I'm a legacy." I waited until the main course. I waited until Davis was swirling his Pinot Noir and making a toast about family values and shared legacies. That's when I stood up and slid the envelope across the table toward him. He blinked. "What's this?" "Your worst oversight," I said quietly. Everyone stared. He opened it. Inside, a copy of the forged deed transfer, a notarized affidavit from the real notary in Arizona, and a letter from my lawyer. I didn't say anything. I let the silence do the talking. His face went pale. He started to say something, but I cut him off. "You stole a church from your dying sister, forged her signature, then planned to profit off it by turning it into a cocktail venue. You're being dramatic," he snapped. "No," I said. "She left it to me. She just didn't use a lawyer. She used trust." He stood up, but his knees knocked the table. A wine glass tipped. Someone gasped. Rory started laughing. He thought it was a joke. "It's fine," Davis muttered. "This can be fixed." "No," I said. "It can't. The land's still in her name. The permit's still tied to her original vision. You can't demolish it without consent from the trust." That's when Rory asked, "Wait, what trust?" And I finally said it out loud. "The Ellison Preservation Trust. Established by my mother in 2021. I'm the sole trustee." It was like dropping a grenade into a pond. No one moved. Not even Gloria. Because in that moment, they realized something. The poor, forgettable niece they'd been patronizing for years, she now legally controlled the one piece of real estate they'd bet everything on. And I wasn't selling. I wish I could say I felt victorious. But the truth is, when I got home that night, I collapsed on the floor in my mom's old reading chair and sobbed until my ribs hurt. Not because I'd won, but because they never even asked what she wanted. They just assumed she'd go quietly. That I would too. Have you ever carried something so heavy that it made your chest hurt every time someone told you it's not that deep? Because this is that deep. If you've ever had your family look you in the face and still pretend you're invisible, I see you. And I hope you know that sometimes silence isn't peace. It's erasure. If they thought I was going to fade quietly after that dinner, they really didn't know me at all. I'd spent years biting my tongue around these people. Smiling through backhanded compliments, staying quiet while they called my mother eccentric, unambitious, or my personal favorite. So noble, choosing principle over success. As if she was some underperforming intern in the family portfolio. But now, I had the one thing they couldn't manipulate or buy their way out of. Control. And I planned to use it. The next morning, I called a meeting with the board of the Historic Preservation Society. I showed them everything. My mother's original restoration plans, her education initiatives, her partnerships with local public schools. They were stunned. Most of them had no idea this proposal had ever existed. By the end of the week, the Ellison Church was back under official historical review, which paused all proposed commercial modifications. Translation: no demolition, no gutting, no rooftop bar, no velvet rope weddings. Uncle Davis tried to call me 5 times. I didn't pick up. He emailed me once, subject line, "Can we talk like adults?" I left it unread. Instead, I partnered with one of Mom's old colleagues at the university, a woman who now runs an outreach program for underfunded high schools. Together, we began drafting a public relaunch of the Ellison Arts Initiative. Meanwhile, my lawyer kept digging, and that's when we found something unexpected. A second property. Not the church, not a storage unit. A 4-story brownstone on the east side. Turns out, a year before she died, My mom had quietly purchased it under a shell LLC. It had been her retirement plan. Part gallery, part residency space for young artists, and eventually part of her legacy trust. She never mentioned it. Never bragged. Never used it to prove a point. But guess who'd filed a quiet petition 2 months after her death to absorb the property into family assets due to ambiguous ownership? Yep, Davis. And it wasn't just a petition. It was a backroom deal with a family associate on the zoning board, scheduled to go through in 3 days. No public announcement. No legal notice. Just buried paperwork and a rubber stamp vote. I didn't scream. I didn't send a dramatic email. I booked an appointment with the city clerk. I showed up in my best secondhand coat, a flash drive in my purse, and the original property deed in hand. Then I did what the rest of them were too arrogant to consider. I filed a public injunction. And then I leaked the entire story to the Post and Courier, the city's oldest newspaper. The headline 2 days later: Daughter of late Professor Anne Ellison blocks secret family land grab of Arts Initiative property. The article featured side-by-side images, one of my mother giving a guest lecture in front of a painting by Faith Ringgold, and one of Davis cutting a ribbon in front of a condo development named after himself. The backlash was swift. Local artists rallied around the trust. Educators shared memories of Mom's quiet mentorship. Even the mayor's office released a statement about respecting legacy and ethical development. But the moment that made my chest burn with something dangerously close to vindication? Rory texted me. Just one line. "Are you seriously the one who owns the apartment I live in?" Wait, what? I called my lawyer. Turns out, the LLC that owned the Eastside brownstone. It included 3 renovated rental units, and one of them? Rory's. He'd been renting from me for the past 6 months, and complaining loudly about the weird new owner who raised rent by $150 and put a no loud guests after midnight rule in the lease. I sat there in my kitchen, coffee in hand, just staring at the ceiling for a full minute. Because I realized they didn't just overlook me. They built their lives on top of what she left me, without ever stopping to wonder who was holding the foundation. You know, there's a special kind of pain that comes from realizing your family never saw you. Not because you were hiding, but because they never thought you were worth looking at. If you've ever had to sit quietly while people erased you from your own story, if you've ever been the extra, the afterthought, the charity case, I hope you know you're not alone. And I hope you live long enough to see the look on their faces when they realize you were the headline all along. I didn't plan a dramatic confrontation. I didn't need one. They'd already written the script. I just waited for the curtain to rise. A week after the news article dropped, I got a formal notice. Davis was contesting the trust in probate court. Claimed Mom had been mentally unfit when she made the property purchases, that she was easily manipulated. Said it wasn't about the money, just preserving family order. Classic. So I showed up in court in that same blazer. The one they all whispered about. The one they thought meant I was struggling. But this time, I brought files, receipts, emails, appraisals, voicemails from Mom, audio recorded and time-stamped. Her voice steady, her plans deliberate. And then I brought out what none of them expected. A video. It was dated 4 months before her death. A guest lecture she gave to a room full of students. The topic? Legacy and erasure. She spoke about how women, especially women of color, women without wealth, had their contributions stolen, buried, renamed. She said, "Legacy isn't what we leave behind. It's what we build into others, piece by piece, so that even when they forget our name, they're standing on our work." And then, she looked directly at the camera and said, "To my daughter, if you're watching this, protect the church, not the building, the purpose. Let them underestimate you. Let them talk. When they try to cash out the future, remind them who wrote the blueprint." The courtroom was dead silent. Even the judge blinked twice before she looked back down at her notes. Davis sat stone-faced. Rory didn't even come. The ruling? The trust stands. The properties remain under my stewardship. The forgery investigation is being reviewed by state attorneys. And Davis? He didn't get disbarred. Not yet. But the ethics complaint went public. He stepped back from the family firm. His name was quietly removed from the Ellison Foundation gala invites. His golf buddies stopped replying to his messages. Funny how silence shifts sides. A few months later, we hosted the Ellison Arts Initiative grand opening at the old church. We didn't gut it. We restored it. The stained glass caught sunlight again. The reading nook stayed right where Mom wanted it. A little girl from a nearby public school stood at the front of the chapel and read a poem she'd written about her mother. And for the first time in over a year, I felt like I could breathe. Like I'd finally been heard. Not just by the world, but by the one voice that mattered most. They tried to erase her legacy with a signature. They didn't realize she'd already carved it into me. The lesson I learned? Power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, steady, relentless. Sometimes it's the kid no one noticed, rewriting the ending. If any part of this hit home, if you've ever been underestimated, pushed aside, or told you didn't belong, drop your story in the comments. I'm listening. And if you're still in the middle of your own fight, keep building. They won't see it coming.